Paraeducator Residency is a successful workforce strategy currently implemented in the field, leading to sustainable residency programming, growing educators already aligned to the community. Resident teachers hired as paraeducators allows teachers in training to retain their employment with salary and health benefits, while in coursework to become a credentialed teacher. Thank you so much for coming, our mentors from Lemon Grove School District in the Southern region. We just want to talk a little bit about the Paraeducator Model of Residency, and you both are mentors to paraeducators who are themselves residents learning to be a teacher, and hopefully will be your next teacher, your next new teacher in the new school year. So what we had prepared to talk about first was what works well with your resident also being a para. You both had paras for years, but now you have a para that's also a resident. What works well?
One of the things that I feel that work well, and I come from a kind of a different point this year. My resident teacher has been a para before, so he came with a lot of that knowledge of how to be a para. So when he kind of transferred into the resident teacher program, it was really natural for him to be like para and learning how to take on that facilitation role kind of at the same time. And so it's been just a very natural process this year.
Agreed. I have a similar situation as well. And last year it was different. My resident wasn't a para initially, so that was the difference that I've seen this year. When someone does have that background, it does tend to be a little bit easier because they do have, like Hillary said, that knowledge. And it does make it a little bit easier because they do know what to expect. So it does make it easier.
I think it's great that you both have had a different experience. One is taking a homegrown and helping them go into a teaching role, and then someone that wasn't teaching yet. And so those are really different experiences. So that might lead into what have been the hard parts. Have there been any hard parts to either having a para that you're used to just staying in their para role, little by little taking on the teacher role, or having a new person in your classroom that needs to take over at some point?
One of the things that's actually been really interesting about having my resident go from a para to more of that teaching role is actually like growing from just being that supportive aide to being the facilitator in teaching. And it is kind of a mind shift between just helping someone and teaching someone. And so that is like, we've had a lot of conversations about how to kind of scale back that super supportive to that more of like guidance and facilitation that we do as teachers. And so that's just it. I wouldn't say it's like the hard part, but it has definitely been something that's come up this year.
Yeah, and it's also like how the students see them as well, right? It's that transition piece. So I feel like it's that time that you have them to get comfortable with the curriculum, that time for them to see and practice, and just to get in front of the kids. And there's the role transition, right? So you have to have that time to experience and get comfortable with everything that might be new to them, especially like we were saying earlier. I think it's also hard if you're coming from a different district, for example, you have to learn what is different and new here. So I think that might be a little bit harder, just taking your background knowledge and then kind of changing that as well. I think that might be just the hard part. Other than that, I think everything else was just very easy. It's really been a great experience.
So speaking of that, you both talked about the benefits of having your para also be a resident, and that there were so many. Can you talk about the reason you would say, "Oh, I want that para that's going to be a teacher," and why is that?
If you don't mind, Hillary, I'll start. I
Yeah.
absolutely have loved it. I think that it's been a huge benefit for us, for our students. And then they're going and being teachers, so they have a lot more at stake, right? This is something they want. So you can see a difference. I just, it's a huge benefit.
Yeah, our model at the school that I'm at, we do a lot of co-teaching. The majority of our day is actually through co-teaching. So having that, para resident is wonderful because now we have a third person who can run small groups in there. So instead of it just being me and the gen ed teacher, teaching and running small groups, we have a whole other educator in there. And so the teachers or the students see us as three teachers in the room. And that's just been, I can't even speak enough about how great that is.
Wow, it does sound like such a benefit. Did anything occur as you got going that you would go back and say, ooh, I think I would kick this off a little bit differently to make it smoother in any way? If there's another institution out there that is thinking of implementing the para model, what advice would you give for something that you would do to make sure that it was just as smooth and effective as possible?
Well, the beginning of the year is always interesting. I guess for me, just preparing the resident that there's going to be a lot of sitting and listening or sitting and watching because so much happens behind the scenes. Those first, the week before school starts and the first week of school, there's so many meetings. There's IEP calendaring. There's setting up the schedule. There's working with your co-teachers. There's doing this. There's doing that. And all these things are pieces that have to happen before you can actually start teaching. And so there's like a lot of sitting and watching and sitting and listening and just this wealth of information that's
It's
happening.
overwhelming.
Yeah, all at one time. And it doesn't make a lot of sense because you haven't been in the classroom yet. And, it's just a lot. But it's also very important that,
And I feel like after you have done all of that, like Hillary, like all of that stuff that you're saying, you also have to take a moment to also have them digest all of that. Because again, there is a lot of sitting, which they're like, what are you doing? Right. And I always say, please take this moment to actually enjoy it because once we start, it is going to be crazy. And they don't realize that until halfway through the year. And they're like, oh my gosh, remember when you said that? And I'm like, yep, this is exactly why I say, just take a moment. But it's really important for them to understand that calendaring, right? Those IP meetings, because it is absolutely essential. I also feel that is important. What I've learned this year is to make sure that they have a moment to learn and see our curriculum. That is absolutely essential. Learn and talk and see. And I thought that was really beneficial and something that I learned.
You just brought up something that makes me want to make clear the difference between having a resident in your classroom and then having a resident that is also a para educator in your classroom. So something that I've heard is that, well, when this para starts taking over, what happens to all those things I need my para to be doing that I don't have anymore? So what would you say to that?
We kind of swapped by the end. This is my second year in this program, and like so we really did kind of swap positions. And I mean, it's good for me too. It's good for me to be familiar with all the para roles too, since I'm kind of managing this system, this program. So, but that is we would work it out and see what needs to be done.
Yeah, the roles definitely do change because ultimately what you want your resident to do is to become the teacher, right? You want them to eventually take over and kind of essentially take your role, right? Because they're learning that. So in the beginning, they are your paraprofessional, right? They're learning this role, and then slowly and surely they're learning your role, and then in a couple of weeks they're co-teaching essentially with you, right? And then they're learning a different role, and then but by the time halfway through the year, you're like just kind of take over and you're watching them and making sure that they're being successful. But seriously, at the end of that, they're kind of no longer in that paraprofessional role. They're really, truly blossoming and flourishing and truly becoming that resident teacher. And the students actually see them as another teacher. And so do our teachers. It's really great.
I'm so happy it's been a positive experience. Were you involved in anything that the administration did to prepare paraeducators to slowly but surely take on the teaching role, or any upfront orientations, or any way that you and the para were helped to navigate this evolving relationship you were going to have, or the evolving relationship they were going to have with their para colleagues?
Well, I know that they attended the new teacher orientations that all brand new teachers in our district
Okay.
attend. So they were kind of treated as new teachers in that aspect. They definitely were prepared. They were given training in SACE, which is our program that we write IEPs. And so like the district did prepare in the back end on that stuff, but not necessarily like how we were gonna run that.
Right.
That's kind of site specific.
Yeah, but it is interesting to hear that paraeducators were trained in ways that other paraeducators were not involved in. Right. And they're coming before school, I understand, to help with planning, just like any teacher would do. And they're staying late, like teachers do parent conferences, IEPs. So they really are getting both the para experience and then the wider teacher of record experience.
Absolutely. And it's so beneficial for them because can you imagine when they have to start, they are just really prepared. And if I was like, if I had that experience initially, I can only imagine. It's just
Yeah.
wonderful. It's
I
absolutely
was
wonderful.
I was reflecting with another RSP, and we were like, yeah, remember our first years? We were kind of just like thrown into it and
Just
did
thrown
like
in.
figure it out.
Yeah,
And this way they have an entire year model from start
to
to
finish.
finish of
It's
what the
amazing.
job is.
What
It's
does it look
wonderful.
like? What should you do? How do you handle the situations? Behaviors. I mean, you name it. Going to an actual IEP meeting. I remember my first IEP meeting. I don't even know if I did the paperwork correctly. I don't know.
The two of you have just grown your next best colleague, who is looking to be employed right there where they learned. So it's a wonderful thing, and just thank you so much for sharing your experience with the field.